Joining me to discuss the broader budget is House Appropriations Chairman Josh Tanner, Senate Finance Chairman Scott Grow, and committee members Representatives Rod Furniss and Brooke Green. Representative Tanner, I want to start with you. Can you walk us through the reasoning for additional proposed cuts from what the governor initially proposed, that 3% versus an ongoing 5%?
So one of the things that when the governor presented his budget was an ongoing aspect is what we looked at. And that's really your stability. So your long-term stability, that's what you look at for that stability aspect. And what we noticed when we first got the governor's budget was we were at a negative ongoing balance in 2026. And then when you got down to 2027, we were in a negative, but we weren't just in a negative, we were in a significant negative. We were looking at a $107 million negative in there. So they were using one-time abilities to prop up the budget to make the bottom line in the very end kind of come out. The tough part is that within 27, he had $25 million on the bottom line. And that was really what when we got that was where we looked at, we have a structural problem at this point in time. We need to rebalance it out. Now, go ahead.
Oh, and when you say 27, we're talking about the upcoming fiscal year 27 that we're budgeting for, and that bottom line is what's left over after you've budgeted everything and done all the math.
Yes.
Senator Grow, can you give us a broad overview of how you're approaching the budget this year?
Happy to, Melissa. Thank you. The word I would hope everyone would remember is uncertainty, because that's what we're dealing with. We have an increased revenue number by 100 million or so over what the governor projected. There's no certainty that will come in. In the governor's budget, there are also some policy bills that other committees would have to pass, over $50 million worth, and that impacts what we're going to have happen in JFAC. The other thing that is uncertain, he talks about the one-time versus ongoing money. We look at the bottom line, which is the end after all the revenue, less all the expenses, and what's left. Last year, when we left the Senate, when we left the legislature, we had $430 million left on the bottom line. And that's essentially gone now. And so when we have a tighter bottom line, the governor gave us about 30 million or so, that leaves us very uncomfortable, because that could change next month when the revenues go up and down each month. So we don't really know how that will end up. So we're just trying to be very conservative and make sure that we fulfill our constitutional mandate to make sure that we have a balanced budget when everything's said and done after we're gone, because that's when it's going to end.
Right.
And we won't know where we are until we're gone.
Right. And we are constitutionally mandated as a state to balance the budget. For comparison's sake, last year, the ending balance was $440 million. Yes. And now the proposal from the governor was much less, as you said.
About 32 million.
In the past, I'm thinking during the recession, sometimes that bottom line was much, much smaller than the $28 million that we're looking at this year. Does that play into the conversation, looking at what Idaho did during the recession and whether or not maybe it's time to dip into the budget stabilization fund to make sure some of those programs aren't cut to the point where it's going to cost more money down the road?
I looked at the years after that, 3 years, where they used up the entire budget stabilization fund and even had cuts up to 25%. We are not in a recession. Idaho is one of the top economies in the nation. There's 26 states that are in recession. We will have a recession. We just don't know when. So we're reluctant to use money that's set aside for reserves for the rainy day when it's not raining.
I know former co-chair Representative Wendy Horman has also said this is not a rainy day. We are not in a recession. It's not an emergency. Representative Green, I know that you see it differently and you have some concerns about this approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I do want to highlight the good senator's comments about where we are within the economy. You know, Idaho ranks in the top 2 or 3 or 4 every year as one of the fastest growing states. We're doing really well. Now, granted, our growth may be starting to slow. We're not going to see that huge insurgent that we saw after COVID, but our economy is actually looking really well. I do want to touch base about the stabilization fund. We put that stabilization fund together because we wanted to be fiscally responsible, and we have done a phenomenal job. Just in that fund alone, we're sitting about $890 million. In all of the pots of money that we have, we're about $1.7 billion. to his point about the uncertainty, we have 2026, we came in, two things played into that, the conformity bill as well as our previous tax cuts. We are in uncertain times. 2026 is where we need to be spending our money and paying attention to, I'm sorry, not spending our money, but spending our time identifying ways to bridge us into 2027. And we have that budget stabilization fund for that reason. We did the right job. We put the money in there. If what we're looking at, to what you mentioned, if we're looking at 40 million, 50 million, that's the time to tap into that. Because how do you look to Idahoans who are potentially losing their care, losing services, their jobs, their furloughs? How do you look to them and say, we want to keep $200 million on the bottom line while your family potentially loses their income? And we really need to be paying attention to that.
You did mention Idaho's strong economy, and Democrats in Idaho have been critical of previous tax cuts, including last year's big tax bill. How much of Idaho's strong economy is directly tied to those conservative tax policies?
Well, we've positioned ourselves incredibly well as a result of some of those. I mean, you look at our income tax rates, in the last 5 years, we have been able to put money back into Idaho's pockets. Did I vote on that bill last year? I didn't. Did I vote on the year prior? I did. Because I too recognize where we have opportunities or an extra surplus is give it back to Idahoans that they can take care of their families. In times like this, where we were fiscally responsible, taking care of our stabilization fund, funding that, ensuring that we had monies when we do come into a crisis, we need to go back and dip into it. We are where we are because we planned well. That's why I don't believe we're in an emergency. Our emergency in 2026 is somewhat of a crisis that was put upon us, but 27 and moving on, we're not in an emergency yet. And I hesitate to make these drastic changes in perpetuity because of uncertainty or assumptions.
Representative Furniss, I want to bring you into the conversation as you are looking at agency requests and proposals, plus all of the other factors, including uncertainty with federal tax conformity and revenues that are coming in. What are your concerns and priorities?
Well, I do have some concerns, and we've been voicing those concerns. We go over those budgets with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, I appreciate the DOGE committee on what they do, but we do DOGE every year in JFAC, the Joint Finance Committee, and by doing that, we go through those and we look hard at every line item. I'm concerned that some of the places that we're cutting may not be the appropriate. You know, when you do a 1% cut and a 2% cut in 2007, we're really not rewarding those agencies that have already done a great job of being as frugal as they possibly can. So now it's up to us in JFAC to go through those budgets, make sure that, see if we can find places where we need to add money. Maybe there are some places where, maybe some agencies we can take 10% out. There's some agencies where we are really cutting too much. A good example of that, and not to get in the weeds too far, but a good example of that is the firefighters in the resource budgets. They are going to have to take $150,000 out because of the 2% cut. What that does, though, and after I talk to the firefighters, that makes it so that one unit can't go out to a fire. And if they get a day where they have 4 fires or 5 fires and one unit doesn't go out, that fire could be $100 million down the road. So it's important that we look at that. One of the issues also that I have is that we really don't have a revenue problem. We really don't have an expense problem, in my opinion. We have a cash flow problem. And the big beautiful bill that happened, we had a House Bill number 40, which was the tax decrease. We saved Idahoans $450 million when we did that last year. The other bill that came after that was the big beautiful bill from Trump. We didn't know that was coming. And that was another $155 million, and next year it'll be $175 million. We didn't know that was happening. But what we do know about the big beautiful bill is that even though those tax cuts come, next year, because of the corporate tax, will come back. It will come back to us on a cash flow basis. So we just need to get through this crunch. And the way you get through that crunch is you use the Budget Stabilization Fund. It's not called the Budget Emergency Fund. It's not called the Budget I'm in Trouble Fund. It's called stabilization. Now, I'm an old banker, so when we have businesses come in and they have a cash flow problem and we can see that they can pay it back, then we issue them the line of credit. Well, we did an analysis in JFAC, and we said, what if we wanted to leave $100 million in our savings account? We want to take $100 million and pay off these bills that we have, not do the 4% cut, not do the cuts in mental health, and not do the 1% or 2% cut. We could pay that $100 million back in 1 year if we stay on projection on where they're at. So I would hope that we would consider that. I know it's not a popular thing, but as a guy that crunches numbers, it makes a lot of sense.
Representative Tanner, you also crunch numbers. I want to get your response to that suggestion.
I think going after a stabilization fund when you're actually not in a recession is probably the most irresponsible thing you can actually do, because we are going to go into recession at some point in time. Idaho is not immune from a recession, but what we will see when that happens is, like the co-chair had stated, you usually get about 3 years, and you always pray that the fourth year does not come, that you actually come out of that. And that's what we need to be able to make it through, because otherwise you're talking about huge, significant cuts, a lot deeper and a lot further than what we're doing. What we're doing is very trimmed up in a sense of what we're doing cuts-wise. Yes, the firefighter aspect that Representative Furniss stated, I agree. The governor put $0 in there in his budget for a fire deficiency fund. So right now we have $1.3 million we're sitting on within that fund. We're hoping to get about $13 million from the feds, which is not enough, because last year we put $40 million into that. We were sitting on over $20 million on top of that, and we've now spent it down that far. I mean, I think any Idahoan can go look at the mountains right now and probably see that there's not much snow out there, and usually that's going to mean for a very tough fire season, and we are sitting in a tough one. So I think right now making sure that some of those pots are actually filled up. But the whole idea of putting the cuts in place right now is just get us our bottom line. Get us our bottom line at a bottom line that's workable. I would like to see us in a heavier bottom line that we're actually even talking about, but because I think it is a more responsible thing to do, because there is a lot of uncertainties when it comes after we leave the building. One of the things is all the supplementals that come, which every year we seem to have a supplemental that comes on Medicaid. Medicaid is a huge cost driver for the state. I know you'll get into that probably later on in discussions. But the other one we're seeing a lot of issues on, which is corrections. Massive supplementals that come in those ones. If you don't have the money on the bottom line, then you end up coming back and having to make additional cuts on the current year that you're already in, putting yourself in a worse position. That's why you're only seeing a 1% currently in 2026, because you're already most of the way through your budget. Realistically, we probably need 2% in 26. You probably need additional 3% above what the governor had done in 2027 to really balance this outright. So I am nervous, because part of the money that's actually on the bottom line is that is still showing this $200 million bottom line, roughly under that, was a $97.5 million transfer of interest funds that are actually going in. Those are that is, again, those won't flow back into the general fund. They're actually using them to spend for a bottom line aspect, and those ones will go away. Now, again, within the $97 million, that's today's dollars. Now, if Trump puts a different Fed chair in, if the rates actually change, that changes this in a whole different aspect, and all of a sudden that bottom line changes massively. Like the co-chair has stated, if a month's worth of revenue changes, I mean, we still are having hopeful for a strong April. If those numbers don't come in that, I mean, we're in a whole different boat as well. So what we're doing is being the fiscally conservative, responsible aspect. When you get down to the bottom line, and even if we do run to where all of a sudden we do have some bad months, the stabilization fund will be tapped at that point in time. It's done through the Board of Equalization. They will get together. This is the executive members of the state. And they will get together, and they can actually use that fund. Now, they can't spend more than what the debt is, but it does have that ability to do that. So we hope that we don't have to do that, because we are not in a recession, and we do want to make sure we're balancing this budget well for the people of Idaho, just like everybody expects to do within your own finances of your own house, your own business. The state should be in no different position.
Just to respond briefly
please.
to that, if I could. The stabilization fund right now is actually overfunded. We have up to 29% of our revenue numbers are there. Statutorily, we only need 15%. So we actually have too much money in our stabilization fund. So rather than have cuts that maybe have long-term effects, like in mental health, or other places, it'd be good to use that money. Now, my good friend here, he and I agree most of the time, and so, you know, I want you to know that we're both fiscally conservative. We both want the very best for the state of Idaho. But what we're seeing in some of the cuts, especially in mental health, we're seeing cuts that we're losing federal dollar match because of those cuts in some places. We're also seeing increased pressure on the sheriffs and ER, because when you cut mental health, you have more people that go to the jails, you have more people that go to the ER, and we're seeing that increase. We've also had a program where it's called ACT, where they take the top 400 individuals in the state that need mental help, and they monitor those almost 24/7. We've had 2 suicides from them already. And what we really need to do is look at the long term, make sure we maximize our federal dollars if that's the case, and then make sure that we don't put pressure back on the property taxpayers, because when we increase the sheriff's problems and the ER problems, that increases property tax. So it's a big picture. We all have to look at all those aspects.
Senator Groh, I want to bring you back.
Can I speak to Medicaid for a minute?
Please.
Okay. For your viewers, so that they understand, the governor has his 3% holdbacks. That does affect Medicaid. And the 1% and 2% that we've added here for 2026 and 27, we are not increasing any cuts to Medicaid. So we're leaving all of that intact. Now, the other thing that they need to understand is the governor worked with his staff, the executive branch, and those departments and agencies. They made decisions where they were going to cut. That's their first cut. We, as the Joint Finance-Appropriation Committee, have an opportunity to look at that again. And so we have different work groups that specialists are on who have an opportunity to look at what has been cut by the department, the Health and Welfare Department, and they can make modifications if they choose to. So that's not the end game, but I want your viewers to understand that we are not doing any additional cuts to Medicaid.
And since you brought up Medicaid, I want to remind viewers of the conversation we had earlier with the 4 Medicaid recipients or Idahoans whose children are on Medicaid. And they had some real concerns about existing proposals from the governor's office. Yes. Let's take a look.
Okay.
Staffing is very scarce at this point. Without that kind of care, my daughter cannot survive.
I am worried that if home and community-based services are cut, I will be homeless because I refuse to go to a nursing home or an institution. I'd rather die.
The ability to find caregivers that are willing to work for you for the low wages that you have and the lack of benefits. There's no health insurance, there's no 401k, there's nothing. And with caregiving, it's not a job that just anyone can fill.
I really wish that before they start cutting programs, they would sit down and talk to us and look at what we can do to fix the programs and not totally cut the programs.
So we have 2 parallel conversations here. We have the numbers and the bottom line, and then we have how it affects Idahoans. And one of the things that one of our guests, Kristen, wanted me to ask was, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Is the legislature listening to the concerns of Idahoans who are affected by these cuts?
We have received emails, phone calls, texts. People have come into our offices asking for changes. We hear very clearly a lot of concerns have been expressed. And that's why, again, within the Joint Finance Appropriation Committee, we will have a work group that will look specifically at that. And if there are tweaks or changes that need to be made within what the governor has recommended, that work group can bring that forward to the whole Joint Finance Appropriation Committee and we'll vote on it.
Absolutely have an opinion here. So one of the things that JFAC, because of the way it's set up, doesn't have public hearings. Oftentimes those take place in the germane committees. We have been asking in this particular case to be able to have some type of hearing. So the Democrats took it upon ourselves to host a 2-3 hour forum where we invited, the public to come and tell us and to share with their stories. We had 3 overflow rooms full of people who, just like the people who were on, speaking to us a moment ago, this is real life. This is their reality. Are we listening to them? Absolutely. Are we all getting phone calls? Absolutely. But are we able to address their needs with the way the system has been put in place this session? No. just a little bit about the mechanics of JFAC and what we're dealing with. So we voted for the first 2026 vote, right, which was the 3% and then the 1%.
And that's the fiscal year we're currently in.
Yes.
That had the 3% holdback last year and an additional 1% holdback after the vote.
Yes. And part of that 3% was the 4% to the providers. And then furthermore, you move into 2027 where we see additional cuts. We have made permanent those 4% provider cuts. So the very services the individuals were just mentioning, we made them permanent. And as a result, and this is the mechanics piece, in our work groups, we're supposed to work within this budget. Well, that base budget, so where we start, has been reduced. And then as a working group, we're supposed to work together and come back up with what we consider, they're called enhancements. So we as a work group get together and say, this program's super important, let's fund it. But now we have to take that enhancement to the body, and then it has to pass out of JFAC, and then it has to go to the floor.
Both floors.
Both floors. And in the time that I have been on JFAC, enhancement bills, you know, the bills that apparently grow government, don't oftentimes pass. And in an election year, it's going to be incredibly difficult for my colleagues to make some of those votes. Take, for instance, one line item, early education or early learning. And we all know early learning has, doesn't necessarily always pass. We're expected to bring back an enhancement bill to address early learning cuts. So that's what I'm getting at. The mechanics and the way the system is set up is going to make it incredibly difficult for us to be responsive to those individuals who are highlighting these constraints.
And Representative Tanner, I want to give you a chance to respond in addition to the emotional part of this. There's also the financial part where often it is more expensive for the state in the long run to institutionalize somebody, to send somebody to a nursing home as opposed to keeping them in their home. And we can talk about the long-term down the road costs in so many of these things, whether it's fire, as you brought up, or courts and the judiciary, or even adult dental with Medicaid. Do those long-term factors play in when we're talking about the current fiscal year and budget setting right now?
I think 100%. That's where you really have to look at Medicaid as a whole. And I've been very critical of Medicaid throughout the entire time I've been in legislature because I am a numbers guy. I sit down, I look through it, and just from a fiscal standpoint, it is unstable. Part of the problem is the legislature itself, the state of Idaho, does not have the control mechanisms within it. The federal government gives us these massive levers to pull, and that's pretty much what they give us. Within that, we get certain ones we can play around with, which is what you kind of saw the governor give that proposal of what he's looking at. Now, a lot of people that are the most scared are the ones with the home and community-based services, which talking with both health and welfare committees is not one that is even being looked at. But there are a lot of people out there that are really driving up this committee. I mean, we saw what the Democrats did, bringing a lot of people together, trying to create this fear aspect of what is going on when some of the areas that they're really fearful of are not even areas that are going to get looked at. And so it is frustrating, that part is frustrating. Provider rate aspects, we gave large provider rate cut increases just a few years back, and it was a tough thing. I advised against it at that point in time. This last year when we were passing the Medicaid budget out, I pushed for a provider rate cut at that point in time because we needed stability within those numbers, because otherwise we do hit a point to where all of a sudden you're cutting some of those programs that will be large cost drivers just from a cash flow standpoint. And sometimes those are hard decisions. We look at Medicaid expansion. To me, I think the areas you want to look at to protect the most are the children, the disabled, and the elderly. We do have a large population of able-bodied working adults that get service. It's supposed to be $400 million. Now it's at $1.3 billion. Supposedly, we're not actually saving money if you cut it. And they argue different points. So that's actually not true at all. There's a lot of programs you don't actually have to bring back up. We also have Obamacare, the exchange in Idaho now. That addresses that. That's still about 80% pay within from that class point within the federal government. So there are a lot of other programs out there now that weren't there then that I think that is one that needs to be looked at, and because I do think you should protect the most vulnerable, and we do have a population of people that are getting protected that are not actually protecting the most vulnerable. It's actually making the most vulnerable more vulnerable.
You said that you were previously opposed to rate provider increases. You support the 4% ongoing cut to those Medicaid reimbursement rates. And at the same time, you're also saying that the most vulnerable need to be protected, while they're the ones who are telling us that they are the most impacted by those rate provider cuts. How do you make those two truths mesh for you in this budget?
To me, it's going through and looking at which services and which programs that are out there that are the ones that, I mean, if we are looking at certain ones, like I stated, Medicaid expansion is one. It'd be an easy one for me to check off. Now, there are people that it's benefited. There is abuse within that system. There is abuse within all of Medicaid, and that's part of the problem we run into as well. It's you get abuse within Medicaid from providers themselves, more so than from individuals. But you get individuals as well that take advantage of some of those programs. They show up in the emergency room where it's not an emergency. Maybe they just forgot to pick up their medication, and they show up in the emergency room just to be able to go get their medication. They come up with some scenarios of why they actually need to be there, and in the end, they just get their medication and then they leave. And this has been, I mean, I've talked to ER doctors, I've talked to nurses, we don't just corner ourselves in when we're looking at some of these things. You look at it overall, and that's the tough part. And the federal government really doesn't give the state the ability to actually pull the levers it needs to do the things what we need to do within a state to actually bring a program that actually is going to work for overall Idahoans. We are dictated very, very heavily from the feds. I have talked to Dr. Oz about this when I've been in D.C. about trying to give some of the power back into those states, and so far, that's just where we're at, and it's at this point in time. I mean, yes, there will be decisions that probably get made this year that do have some potential cost implications that are down the road. But again, that's why we kind of did this is because we wanted to give the working groups the ability to actually work through some of those things and go, we want to protect this area. We don't want to protect this. One of the things that also the co-chair and I have both done is we've gone down to the germane committees to speak about the JFAC process, to make sure that these the germane committees like health and welfare are engaged on some of these issues that are going on and actually holding those hearings. And when the governor does give those recommended cuts, and it was an array of things to look at, that they can actually look at those, they can actually hold hearings on those, they can actually pass and make a decision on those ones that then comes back to JFAC.
Representative Furniss, we're almost out of time, but I did want to give you one chance to respond.
Thank you kindly. Appreciate that. My good friend here is right. The federal government hamstrings us immensely on Medicaid, and if we had primacy over Medicaid, we would do a much better job, and we'd be able to make sure the people that need a hand out get that, but there's a lot of people that just need a hand up. If we could teach them how to fish rather than give them a fish, that's a little better, and we have programs ready for that. My heart goes out to the people on the screen, it really does, and there are people that we have to take care of. And at the same time, sometimes we get hamstrung by the programs we put in place. The MCOs, what's the acronym?
Managed care.
Managed care. If it was up to me, we would bring managed care in-house and be able to manage those individuals so that they don't go to the ER when they need to. They get their drugs at the proper place. We always see rate of returns really good when we manage. We have managed care. I'm a licensed insurance agent. I do large company health insurance, so we use managed care from time to time. And we do see improvements in claims when we use managed care. The people that are most worried about their benefits, I think that a lot of those benefits have been cut by the federal government. Although there are appeals processes. I know some of them are worried about the times they go in, the number of times there's an appeals process for them to go again. And they need to know that Idaho's not going to turn away. We're going to make sure their backs are covered. We're going to make sure they're taken care of. At the same time, we need to make sure that we can pay our bills. And we'll do that. And hopefully we know that, again, I want to reiterate that we're in a cash flow crunch. We're not in a spending crunch. If we can get through the cash flow part using the stabilization fund, I believe in Reaganomics. By reducing taxes, we'll increase revenues, and we'll have enough money to get through our future.
All right. I could talk to you for all day about this, but we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.